Picture this. The year is 1896. Niagara Falls is about to change the world. Newspapers are screaming about the dawn of the electrical age. Nikola Tesla's alternating current system is being hailed as pure genius. 100,000 horsepower about to light up Buffalo and transform civilization forever. Everyone's watching the spectacle above ground, the massive turbines, the engineering marvel, the promise of endless power flowing through copper wires into American homes for the first time. But nobody's talking about what happened below. Nobody's asking questions about what the construction workers found when they started digging into the bedrock beneath the falls, and that's exactly the problem, because while the world was celebrating humanity's electrical awakening, a handful of engineers were staring at something that shouldn't exist, something that predated everything they thought they knew about power generation, something so impossible that the only rational response was to bury it again and pretend they never saw it. This is that story. The one that got erased from the engineering journals. The one that never made it into the triumphant newspaper headlines. The one that sits today in scattered archival fragments. In faded photographs nobody was supposed to keep. In private letters written by workers who couldn't explain what they'd witnessed underground. When the excavation orders came down in early 1896, the instructions were straightforward, simple civil engineering. Dig beneath the falls, carve out spaces for the turbine chambers, test the bedrock to make sure it could handle the weight and stress of the new power station. Standard procedure, foundation work, nothing exotic. The engineers expected rock, maybe some natural cave systems formed over millennia by water erosion, perhaps remnants of old attempts to harness the falls' wooden water wheels, primitive mill infrastructure, abandoned construction from earlier failed projects. Things you could explain, things you could categorize, things that fit the historical record. Then the drills broke through the first layer, and everything changed. They hit chambers, not natural formations, not crude excavations. Chambers, precisely engineered spaces carved with geometric accuracy that made the 1896 crews stop and stare. Rooms with perfect right angles. Vaulted ceilings that held their curves without support beams, cable conduits running in organized patterns through solid rock. And the dimensions? Wrong. Too large, too sophisticated, too deliberate. This wasn't some forgotten watermill from 50 years earlier. This was infrastructure that looked like it belonged to a power station, but not the one they were building. Something else. Something older. Something nobody had blueprints for. The site supervisor sent word upstairs. The response came back quickly. Keep digging. Document what you find. But keep it quiet. So they kept digging. And what they uncovered in the weeks that followed would haunt some of those workers for the rest of their lives. Layer after layer of construction that shouldn't connect but did. Modern surface infrastructure from known American projects. Then deeper sections that looked decades older. Then beneath that, chambers and conduits that didn't match any documented timeline at all. And here's the truly disturbing part. It all integrated perfectly. You understand what that means? Infrastructure from different eras, supposedly built by different people with different purposes across different centuries, all following the same engineering logic, the same conduit geometry, the same power distribution patterns, the same load-bearing framework. Different builders don't do that. Different time periods don't share identical engineering languages unless they're all drawing from the same source. Unless they're all tapping into something that was already there. Beneath Niagara Falls, someone had built a master grid, and everyone who came after, knowingly or not, had been plugging into it. If you're still with me, if this is making your brain itch in that uncomfortable way that happens when official history stops making sense, then subscribe. Because these stories exist in the margins. They live in the documents that were never meant to survive. And finding them requires looking where the textbooks refuse to go. As the excavation pushed deeper, the anomalies multiplied. Workers started finding conduits that were too uniform. Passages carved with tolerances tighter than anything 19th century tools should produce. Tunnel walls so smooth they looked polished. Channels cut with such precision that you could run your hand along them and feel no variation, no tool marks, no irregularities. And then the real mystery emerged. Chambers designed for heat, serious heat. High-temperature ceramics lining the walls. thermal shielding embedded in the infrastructure, insulation materials that only make sense if you're containing massive thermal energy. The kind of heat you'd get from industrial processes operating at temperatures no documented American facility had ever reached. But here's the problem. There's no record of Niagara Falls ever hosting that kind of operation before 18. No historical documents describing furnaces or smelting operations. No evidence of industrial facilities requiring thermal management on this scale. No explanation for why the deepest chambers looked like they'd been built to house technology generating power levels far beyond anything America officially possessed. The construction photographs capture it perfectly. Men standing next to conduits so enormous they look like children, next to subway tunnels. Components machined with fits so tight that modern electrical engineers study the images and can't figure out how they were manufactured. Infrastructure that resembles contemporary power systems more than it resembles anything from the 1800s. But the most revealing detail isn't in the photographs. It's in what's missing from the official reports. Because when you read the documentation from late 1896 after the power station opened, you find something disturbing: silence, vagueness, omissions. The deepest discoveries get summarized in a single sentence. Earlier construction, geological formations, pre-existing infrastructure of unknown origin. That's it. No detailed descriptions, no technical analysis, no investigation into what those systems were or who built them. Entire chambers are left out of the final architectural drawings. Photographs that clearly show advanced engineering get filed away in private collections instead of being included in the official project archive. It's as if someone made a deliberate choice about what could be remembered and what had to be forgotten. The deeper layers told a story that didn't fit. Structures that looked nothing like early American engineering. Technology that didn't match European power systems. Components that didn't even seem to belong to the same era, yet somehow functioned as a unified whole. It was like discovering a technological language nobody remembered how to read, except pieces of it were still there, still functional, still waiting beneath the bedrock like a sleeping giant that nobody wanted to wake up. The chambers themselves defied easy categorization. These weren't rough excavations hacked out by workers with pickaxes. They were architecturally deliberate spaces, rooms with exact proportions, ceilings that curved with mathematical precision, cable housings laid out in patterns that suggested a master plan, a comprehensive power distribution network that no longer existed in any known blueprint. Some chambers had been sealed completely, packed with fill material so dense the workers initially thought they'd hit solid bedrock. But once they broke through, they found interiors that looked untouched, preserved, as if someone had carefully mothballed these spaces, intending to return someday. The walls were smooth, the channels were precision cut, and the infrastructure raised questions nobody knew how to answer. Then came the discovery that still doesn't make sense. The cylindrical housing units. Officially, these got labeled as old turbine casings, abandoned mill equipment, leftover industrial debris from some forgotten waterworks project. But nothing about them fits that explanation. They were too symmetrical, too precisely machined, too perfectly sealed. These weren't crude castings from early industrial America. They looked like they'd been manufactured with tolerances you'd expect from modern precision engineering. Some were large enough for several grown men to stand inside comfortably. Others contained internal mechanisms, gears, rotational assemblies, bearing surfaces that appeared designed for operation at extremely high speeds. Workers described them in private letters as engineered vessels, not storage, not simple mechanical equipment, something designed for power generation, though nobody could identify what kind. And then there were the cable rating systems. These weren't conduits resting on tunnel floors. They were integrated into the rock itself, embedded, positioned at angles that made no conventional sense, carved into stone that clearly predated any electrical infrastructure America officially possessed. It created an uncomfortable implication. The power station being built above ground in 1896 wasn't sitting on convenient geology. It was sitting on something else. something larger, something that might have been a complete electrical distribution system, built by people who never made it into our history books. The deeper the crews dug, the stranger it got. Conduit sections with perfectly uniform dimensions across hundreds of meters, surfaces polished to near mirror smoothness, precision-cut grooves so clean that modern engineers still debate what tools could have created them without leaving any manufacturing marks. But the discovery that caused genuine confusion among the workers was the crystalline formations. These weren't random mineral deposits. They appeared inside certain conduits, fused to metal surfaces, arranged in organized patterns. Some showed electromagnetic properties that the material scientists of 1896 couldn't begin to explain. The official explanation offered later, natural crystallization, mineral buildup from groundwater, doesn't account for why these formations appear in structured arrangements, not random growth. Deliberate placement, designed to conduct or regulate electrical current. That kind of material engineering requires knowledge that shouldn't exist in 19th century America. It requires understanding of electromagnetic properties, crystalline lattice structures, and precision material science that wasn't supposed to be discovered for another 50 years. And then just as quickly as these discoveries emerged, they started disappearing. Chambers were filled back in. Passages were blocked. Deep sections of the excavation zone were sealed off from further exploration. The official justification was always the same: safety concerns, structural integrity, necessary to support the turbine installations above. But if you look at which chambers were sealed first, a pattern emerges. The spaces that got buried immediately were always the ones with the most anomalous technology. The precision housings, the crystalline formations, the integrated cable systems, the engineered chambers that extended far beyond the planned construction footprint. It's as if someone made calculated decisions about what could remain accessible and what had to be hidden again. The most mysterious finds were the passages themselves, not random tunnels, not natural cave systems. An organized network, a grid of conduits that looked less like geology and more like infrastructure. Aligned, measured, planned, as if they were part of a continental power distribution system that stretched beneath North America long before Tesla ever drew his first electrical schematic. And almost as soon as they were uncovered, they were sealed again. Entrances blocked, depths unexplored, existence quietly removed from subsequent engineering documentation. When you study the final weeks of 1896 construction, you notice something impossible to ignore. The excavation didn't conclude naturally. It was terminated, abruptly, not because the work was finished, because someone decided it needed to stop. The tone of the worker notes changes dramatically. Early entries are matter-of-fact, almost routine. But toward the end, the language becomes cautious, incomplete, vague, as if the workers themselves weren't sure what they were allowed to document anymore. In the final chambers they opened beneath Niagara Falls, weren't ordinary. They weren't geological curiosities. They weren't abandoned millworks. They were something nobody could categorize. Multiple reports describe technology that suddenly shifted from the familiar to the incomprehensible. Housings with tolerances so precise you couldn't slide paper between mating surfaces. Cable systems balanced with engineering sophistication that 1896 America was never credited with possessing. Distribution hubs built to handle electrical loads far exceeding anything the new power station would ever generate. And tunnels that extended beyond the excavation boundary, disappearing into darkness beneath what is now modern New York State. Here's the part that always gets buried in the official accounts. The most advanced chambers were sealed the fastest. Workers described filling entire rooms overnight, blocking entrances that had just been opened, packing debris and rubble into spaces that had taken weeks to carefully excavate. It wasn't gradual, it was urgent. The explanation on record: structural concerns, construction deadlines, safety requirements. But that doesn't add up. If it was genuinely about safety, why were the most sophisticated, most precisely engineered chambers the ones sealed first? Why were the obviously unstable geological sections left exposed for turbine installation? Unless those deeper discoveries posed a different kind of threat, not a physical one, a historical one, Because if the infrastructure beneath Niagara Falls truly demonstrated engineering capabilities far beyond 19th century America, if some of that technology didn't match any known electrical system anywhere in the documented world, then the entire narrative of America's electrical age starts to crack. Think about what it would mean. The world's first major power grid, the triumph of the modern era, built directly on top of something far older, something sophisticated, something engineered by people we're told never existed. Think about what it means if the foundations weren't just convenient bedrock but deliberate attempts by 1896 engineers to tap into a power system they discovered but couldn't explain. A system they could use but couldn't replicate. A system that suggested someone else had already solved electrical distribution on a scale that made Tesla's achievements look like rediscovery rather than invention. Maybe that's why the 1896 discoveries were quietly reburied. Not to protect the construction site, to protect the story, the narrative, the timeline we're supposed to believe about human technological development. The surviving photographs tell their own version of events. Workers standing next to conduits that look almost contemporary, components that resemble precision manufacturing more than 19th century industrial equipment, systems too integrated, too sophisticated, too advanced for their supposed age. These aren't the kinds of discoveries that make it into history textbooks. They're the kinds that get filed away in archives nobody checks, the kinds that raise questions nobody wants to answer. Which brings us to the final question. The one no official publication has ever addressed satisfactorily. Why was the deepest evidence sealed away again? Why were the precision conduits buried? Why were the crystalline formations covered up? Why were the integrated power systems hidden? Why were the engineered distribution hubs filled with rubble and forgotten? When you step back and look at the pattern, it becomes clear. Everything that suggested advanced engineering got buried. Everything that implied a sophisticated predecessor civilization got sealed. Even portions of the photographic record vanished, almost as if the 1896 excavation had accidentally revealed a chapter of history that wasn't supposed to surface. A chapter older than the electrical age, older than industrial America, older than the technological timeline we've been taught. And for one brief moment in 1896, beneath the roar of Niagara Falls, the earth opened just wide enough to show it. Workers saw it. Engineers photographed it. Site supervisors documented it. And then, instead of studying it, they closed it again, sealed it, buried it, forgot it, or pretended to forget it. Because if Niagara Falls Power Station truly stands on top of technology built by a civilization we no longer acknowledge as civilization sophisticated enough to engineer continental-scale power distribution using methods we still don't fully understand, then the question isn't just what was discovered in. The question is what else is down there, what other power stations sit on buried foundations, what other dams cover up infrastructure that predates our entire understanding of human history. What other convenient developments gave modern engineers just enough time to see what lay beneath before quickly filling it back in? The 1896 buried chambers beneath Niagara Falls weren't just abandoned equipment from some earlier industrial attempt, they were evidence, a glimpse brief and accidental, into a version of history we were never meant to see, a technological heritage that doesn't fit the approved narrative, a power system that suggests our ancestors or whoever came before, knew things we're only now rediscovering. And that glimpse, that fragment of evidence, is still there, sealed beneath concrete and bedrock, waiting in the darkness under one of the world's most famous landmarks. Now that glimpse becomes your clue, your starting point, your invitation to question everything we think we know about how the modern electrical grid was really built. Because if this is what survived under just one power station, buried in haste and documented in fragments, imagine what still exists beneath the others. Infrastructure humming quietly in the deep places. Technology we didn't build but learned to use. Systems we can't explain but benefit from every day. Something out of place. Something out of time. Something they tried very hard to make sure you'd never find. Thanks for watching. And if this made you see Niagara Falls differently, well, there are a lot more landmarks with stories like this. Underground secrets. buried evidence. Inconvenient truths sealed beneath the infrastructure of the modern world. Maybe I'll see you in the next one.